if President Putin and President Trump are going to meet in the US and it's not in Washington, D.C., then it logically makes sense that it's in Alaska. I think President Putin is much more hamstrung than President Trump. Alaska plays a very special role in US-Russian relations, starting with the Alaska Purchase. So the United States purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867. Alaska has also been this pivotal site for both cooperation and conflict between the US and the Soviet Union and Russia. A moment of cooperation was Alaska was really pivotal for transferring warplanes from the US to Siberia. So they were shuttled up through Canada, through Alaska, over the Bering Strait into Siberia as part of the Lend-Lease program. And then early in the Cold War, Alaska was very pivotal for being sort of on the front lines of defense. The thinking was that if the Soviets were to attack the US, it would be over the North Pole. And Alaska geographically is the US territory that's closest to the North Pole. And so there was a distance early warning line put up to detect intercontinental ballistic missiles. The military expanded in Alaska. And then at the end of the Cold War, Alaska was pivotal again to kind of the reestablishment of friendly relations between the US and Russia. Alaska was the site of citizen diplomacy, so there were a few of these sort of symbolic activities going on at the time to show the so-called melting of the ice curtain. Now, of course, things soured since the Russian annexation of Crimea, and particularly since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. But when it was announced that the two leaders would meet in Alaska, I really wasn't surprised at all, given how important Alaska is to the relationship. But just given Alaska's historical role in the relationship between US and Russia, if President Putin and President Trump are going to meet in the US and it's not in Washington, D.C., then it logically makes sense that it's in Alaska. I think President Putin is much more hamstrung than President Trump, given that, for example, the International Criminal Court has an arrest warrant out for him. So if he lands, in any one of the countries that ratifies the ICC, he could potentially be arrested. We still don't know if President Zelensky will be a part of this meeting. It looked like he wasn't going to be invited, and then Vice President J.D. Vance made the comment that they were working on trying to include him. I don't think that's been confirmed yet. So that's one aspect of it. Europe was shut out of this meeting as well. That's another aspect of it. The fact that the meeting is being held on US soil is very interesting. I think what's on everybody's mind is what's going to be the nature of the discussions, and particularly will President Trump propose that Ukraine cede territory in order to reach a deal between all sides. Trump's foreign policy thus far in this administration has not been very successful. If we think about, he's had a bumpy ride with the tariff policies. Israel and the Israeli-Gazan war continues. He hasn't been able to resolve that. And of course, the Russian-Ukrainian war continues on today. So I would argue that his foreign policy achievements are very few right now. President Trump really needs a win right now. He really needs a victory. And I think he has set his sight on trying to resolve the Russo-Ukrainian war as for that. I know he's been frustrated with both sides, Russia and Ukraine. I think this meeting, it very well could be true that it's a feel out, basically to see what President Putin is willing to concede in order to end the war. And then, of course, we need to know what President Zelensky is willing to concede as well. if President Zelensky is not included, then there can be no deal. But I think, again, I believe President Trump in this case that it is a feel out. Alaska was the significant portion of Russian America, and Russia colonized Alaska, and Russia's legacy lives on in Alaska to this day. So there are many examples. We have Russian Orthodox churches scattered throughout Alaska. We have a small Russian diaspora community here, including Alaskan Creoles, the Alaskan Creole community. It's small, but they are descendants of Russians and Alaska natives. Russia is reflected in a lot of people's last names here. It's reflected in town names. The general impression I get is that people understand that the Russian legacy is an integral part of Alaska. I think, there's been a good relationship between Alaska and Siberia. I think a lot of people are hopeful that we'll get that relationship back at some point. So no, I think a lot of people recognize Russia's impact on Alaska, see that as a big part of Alaskan history, celebrate it, and understand that, that culture being a part of Alaska's history, that is very different from the geopolitics that are going on today.